Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 132. So, you want to write a novel.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
And we are here today to start talking about what? Well, what's this? I can't read my own handwriting.
Well, the thing is, we've been doing a lot of talking about story and also gaming lately. And, you know, of course, we've got the game series that we're working on right now. And it dawned on me, because this was my idea, that we don't do enough talking about. I'm going to take a plate. That we don't do enough talking about very specifically to the writers in the audience about actually writing a novel. There's a lot of people out there that like to world build that, or even the game guys that are thinking, man, I could, this could be a novel. I could write a novel out of this.
Or, you know, if you put the words down on paper, you can convert it into game. You can do what you want to. Use it as a backdrop for a video game. Writing is a good exercise no matter what the final product is. Good writing gets you there. And Michael actually heard a conversation I had with someone else where they were asking me they were surprised, you really wrote a novel in a month? And it never occurred to me that the difficult part was writing.
Yeah. The for those of you that are not aware of what we're talking about, we're actually talking about National Novel Writing Month, which is November, and it's shortened to NaNoWriMo. So that's what we're talking about is NaNoWriMo, and it's July now, which means now is a great time to start gearing up to participate in NaNoWriMo.
And usually what I like to do is I take the month before and I actually prep out. So I have a good outline. I have all the world building elements I need. There's certain things I like to have done ahead of time, but there are even other things that you need to think out a little bit further for, especially when your budget isn't open. And we're going to do a lot of episodes off of some of these topics when we get into October and November. And there might be a special surprise afterwards, but I can't tell you about that yet.
Jeff and I have both participated in NaNoWriMo, and we're going to give you some prep ideas in this episode to lay out what you can start getting ready between now and November. And then as November gets closer, things you can do. And the thing that is, you know, from an interesting perspective, what we can share is Jeff wrote a book and a novel. I didn't. I failed. So you can take both perspectives and learn from both of our experience.
Yeah, because to me, I've never had issues telling stories. And I know that's not Michael's issue because he's full of bleep as well.
Full of ideas.
Yes, ideas.
That's the word that's the idea you were shooting for, right?
I usually bleep that one out. Yeah.
Full of ideas. Yes, ideas. Let me go with your word.
But, you know, the thing is, it's all about prep. And the thing is, there are certain things that you need to prep, but you don't want to prep too far out because then you have to re-emulsify the stuff. But, you know, you need a great outline. I want to start with outline, even though it's not on the list that way. Because.
Well, I think the reason I wanted to put subject first is because I kind of think that is, how can you outline if you don't know your subject?
I agree with that. And the problem with that is with our show, most of our people know the general subject of what they're going to write.
Well, right. But still, I still think it's an important point to note because I might actually be changing my subject.
Okay. Let's start with subject then.
So very simply, before you start your outlining process and your prep, you need to choose your subject, choose the world you're going to either build or write in. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't already done that, consider it. My original, the novel that I didn't write, that is still a very strong idea in my head, it was a zombie novel.
Yeah.
I might purposefully choose a different subject just to choose a different subject and start fresh.
Yep.
Outlining.
Yeah. Well, actually, I want to put a little bit more there. Whenever I do a project for work or when I'm writing a novel, I like to have a one-sentence summary, essentially, of the goal of it. I want to write a story in X world that will cover these themes and subjects. Because for me, I don't like to have overt messages in my novels, but there's certain themes that I'm trying to cover when I write. And I want to know that. So as I'm writing the story and I'm creating my outline, I can always refer back to that mission statement. Like, does this help me do my goal? If it's no, it might still make it in, but it will be more, it'll be the first thing that gets cut out if I need to.
It almost sounded like you contradicted yourself there for a second. You said you don't like to have an obvious theme, but you do like to have a mission.
Have themes. So the mission is the mission of what I'm trying to accomplish. So, for example, a mission statement might be, I want to write the third book to the Stewart Sons trilogy. And it will be based in the world of Gardul, and it will talk about the raising of a child to a knight. And in that, it will cover magic versus class struggle. It will intermingle those, and it will cover rich versus poor. It's covering both of those themes. I don't want the themes to be obvious in the end work, but they are in the work.
Like the reader should pick up on that.
Or they can. And they can, but the way I like to do it too is I don't like to judge the thing and say this is good or this is bad, but the fact that you will know it's there.
You want perspectives, yeah.
I want perspectives from both ends.
I think from in the outlining process that I'm going to do, I love your idea of a mission statement. Yeah. I definitely didn't do that before. So I think I'm going to do that. I'll write a mission statement. Like, this is the intention of the book. Like, this is, if the reader walks away with nothing but one thing, what do I want them to walk away with? Either an idea, a concept, or a thought. It doesn't have to be a political agenda. It could be simply be, make sure to love your family, something like that.
Drink more Ovaltine?
No, not drink more Ovaltine. But the point is the idea of a mission statement. Like, this is the intention of the book. And I like that you also said is as a call to action and something to return to. So when you're deep into it and you've been writing along and you're kind of bleary-eyed, you always have something to return to, almost like this was my battle plan.
And to be honest, this becomes more useful in post-production. So if someone is saying that they don't understand the point of this scene, and it doesn't fit to your mission statement and you need to cut out some words, well,
there you go.
That scene's gone.
Yeah. So what else about outlining? Because you got a bunch of hatch marks.
So for me, I like to start off outlining very much like Mike's very familiar with my first draft outlines, which is essentially a couple bullet points on a board with very broad strokes.
Show outlines. Like, yeah. Well, you know what? Like, your show outlines are exactly the kind of outline that we used to do in school. You'd write like, we want to talk about this. And I do the same thing. When I write a show outline, I do the exact same thing. I'll be like, we want to talk about this subject, and then hit these bullet points, and then cover this subject, and then hit these bullet points, and somewhere in there make fun of Jeff.
Yeah. And you have a bunch of asterisks then throughout.
Yeah. Sometimes when I write the show, and Jeff and I both do this to each other, because there's a big whiteboard here in the studio, and we write the show outline generally on the board, or we'll write notes as we're going. But if we write the outline up on the board, a lot of times we'll put secret things within the outline to make sure the other person read it. Because if they read it, they'll notice there's like some savage insults to the other co-host.
I did something very similar at my other show where I co-hosted with my wife, and she made me erase it.
Because it was mean?
It wasn't mean, but it was, let's say, not going to be discussed in the show.
Gotcha. Can I assume, since it is your wife, that it was of a sexual nature?
Well, I have no comment.
Okay. A gentleman never tells. Jeff was nodding yes. Okay. So more on outline.
Yeah. So when I get my basic outline structure and in there, it's sort of, I kind of look at it and I try and figure out, do I have 3 acts first off? Even though I do a 4-act book, I always
you keep saying that. Like 3. When you say that, are you joking?
I'm lying.
You are joking. Yeah. Okay. Because there are a couple, you've said it enough times that a couple times I thought, does he really do a different story structure where there's a 4-act structure? I'm like, is there something I'm missing? All right. So if you're not familiar with 3-act story structure, we won't get into it here. It's very simple. Just go look up 3-act story structure. Actually, if this is your first.
Cover it very, very quick. Just the
very brief. Okay.
2 sentences.
I'll need 3 because it's 3 acts. Okay. So 3-act story structure. The beginning is your introduction. That is all of your introducing your characters, your places, and what have you. And it's not like you can't still introduce characters and places throughout the book. You still can, but the main players are going to be introduced in the beginning of the book. Okay. The second is your conflict. That's the main body of the story, but you're going to introduce the main conflict. I feel that you can introduce the main conflict in the introduction, but some people like to say that.
Enjoy do that.
Some people like to introduce it as what I like to call the turn in Act 2, where things start to change and you realize, okay, stuff just got real, and now you're going to be dealing with the main conflict in the book. And then Act 3 is where you start to get into the resolution of that conflict. So you can actually tell when you can see it right on the page where, okay, things just turned again, and now we are strolling towards what will be the conclusion of the story. Now, the importance of the great thing about having a 3-act structure is it is a structure, and it tells you
it's worked.
It's
millions of times.
Yeah, it's it's been around for thousands and thousands of years since the beginning of storytelling. The reason it works is because it just works. It's set up that way. It's a great structure. If you've never used it, look it up, do a little reading, give it a try. It's there for a reason. It's existed for a reason. It's successful for a reason.
And so once I've identified where I want to identify that my actual 3-story structure is in there and it's actually the complete story. Because sometimes you'll do the outline and you're like, I don't know where this is going. There's no conclusion or there's no real conflict here. And in my kind of books, you need conflict because I'm mean.
I think a good book should have. I mean, what is a good story without conflict?
All stories have conflict. It's just I think people get confused with the word. It means it has to be fisticuffs.
Well, that's what I mean. Like the word conflict is the word conflict, not fighting.
Yeah.
Conflict could simply be the disagreement between two lovers in a romantic story. Like that is still that's still conflict.
I like that part of that. So then what I do is I have many. I like to have a little bit of a story going in each act as well, a subplot, as one might call it, which is sort of the 3-act structure within the first act, a 3-act structure within the second act, but they build an intensity and they build into each other. Not necessarily story-wise, but it helps build the emotion and it helps develop the characters through the actions that are happening in these miniaturized events. And then also because this is part of a series, I have to make sure do the overall themes of the series come in. And for me, it is peasant versus upper class. Is competency more important than blood? And that's really kind of the idea of the first story and or the first trilogy. And part of this book is the conclusion of that idea, where I make the statement where I let you determine on if you think it was good or bad what happened. I think most modern people think competency is more important than blood. But for a long time, that wasn't true. So I like to do that. And then once I have all of the story points I have, I'll add in a few more bullet points wherever parts of my 3-act structure are off balance to try and add in more character development, add in maybe additional storylines for other characters.
I think you might be getting a little ahead of yourself because now it sounds like you're talking about story as opposed to just outline.
Oh, this
is all in your outline?
It's all my outline.
Okay.
And then I will actually even have scenes and characters I need. Because as a world builder, I need to make sure I have an idea of all of these characters. Usually they're floating around in my head, but it's not bad to write them down.
Oh, yeah. You think? I think it's a good idea to pin them down and have them recorded somewhere.
You're going to create this memorable character in a movie, like say a wise old guy. And then a couple years later, when you bring back the character, you don't remember him.
Yeah, that's one of the problems I had with one of my old stories is that I actually created a religion, and I wrote it down, okay. But I wrote a very synoptic version of it.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I thought I wrote a huge thing on it because I must have thought it all. I know I remember having a whole bunch of ideas where I kind of cobbled together Buddhism and Catholicism and created a hybrid religion out of them. And I wrote something down, but then I had a lot more complicated ideas on it in my head. When I went back to what I wrote down and I looked at it because I hadn't touched it in a long time and I had forgotten a lot of the details, I was like, I know I wrote that down, and I pulled it out and it was very skeletal. And I was like, oh no. So I know throughout some of that story, I probably even contradicted some of the rules of the religion because I couldn't remember them.
Yeah. Yes. But for me, that my outline does 3 things. It gives me a checklist for my world building. Do I have everything I need? If I realize that in the second scene, like the city they're in changes, I need to know where they're going, how far it is, and what it's like when they get there. I like to have usually at least 3 ideas to describe all of my elements. That way I can quickly gloss over it because I prefer the reader to fill in most of the imagination. Sometimes I'll add details over time, but in general, there's usually 3 basic things, ideas I want to convey in a place, a person, or a thing.
I'm going to cut you off right here, and I've got a great reason why. Mm-hmm. I've decided we're going to do an entire episode on outlining.
Yes.
Because we clearly can.
Yes, I think we'll do that in October.
So, outlining episode to come. Mm-hmm. And I do also want to mention one other thing in the outlining. When we say outlining, that means outlining the story. You can outline your story structure. Mm-hmm. You can outline your schedule. You can outline your characters. You can outline your chapters. I have a great chapter outline for the book that I didn't write. Yeah.
Chapter outlines really,
it's pretty important.
Yeah, that's the key.
It helps. Yeah.
That's the basis of mine.
So moving on in our prep schedule or our prep list is schedule.
Yeah. And this is an important one because we're really targeting this to people like us who have full-time jobs beyond this. You know, I do another podcast. I have a 40-hour week job.
I have
sometimes more.
I have a 40-hour week job. I have church obligations. So
yeah. And so the thing is really, and we'll talk about this one is really important too, because you have to realize that you know right now, and you might lie to yourself, but you know how much energy you have at the end of the night. Writing in this scenario is a little bit differently because a lot of times you can be a little bit more creative if you're a little tired. You need control of your brain, but you don't need it to be really logical when you write the story out.
Yes.
And so you can do story in the evening, a couple hours, and you have an idea of your word count. So if you write 7 days a week, and let's be honest, if you do all the stuff that we do, or even a little bit less, you probably won't get away with that every night. You have to understand the bulk of your writing is really Saturday, Sunday. Mm. And then like for someone like Michael, who has church, and what he means that is not just going to church, he has obligations on top of that. So he probably loses more of his Sunday than other people who just go to church, or people who don't go to church obviously have more time.
Yeah. It always cracked me up when I was younger. People talk about going to church on Sunday for like 3-4 hours. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's insane. And now that's pretty much what I do. Like I go and I do service, but then we'll hang out and talk. And then sometimes like tomorrow we actually have coffee hour, which means I have to make, and by I mean my wife, you know, we have to make a bunch of, you know, egg salad sandwiches and some fruit. And we have food prep to do today. And then we have to serve tomorrow. Yeah. So half of my Sunday will just be hanging out at church and talking to people, serving food, and also participating in service. But getting back to the point of mentioning all this is in the schedule, you have to know how much time you have now, how little time you will have come November when you're ready, and also that you have to be willing to make sacrifices and cut things out. I play a lot of video games too during the week. I'm going to have to cut that out if I'm going to have time to write.
We'll actually go over, we're going to do an episode more about budget. This thing that my wife and I put together called a time budget. You know, time is kind of like money. You have a limited quantity of it. And
absolutely.
In a way, it's more important than money. In my book.
Way more important, way more valuable to me.
I can go out and learn more skills or get another job, which hopefully I can get more money for doing. So I can I at least have a chance to increase my income. My time is my time.
Yeah, there's no making more of it.
Yeah. So that's an important one. We'll talk a lot more about that one in detail. But the key is, I don't focus on daily word counts. People, you'll throw yourself off. You maybe have a general goal. You know, during the weekdays, it's less. On your days off, it's more. I'm
going to slow you down for just a second because we haven't actually talked about that. For anyone who's never done NaNoWriMo or never actually sat down to write a novel, generally a novel, and specifically for NaNoWriMo, they mean you don't go by page count because you have no idea how big they're going to print the pages or how big they're going to print the words on the pages. So you go by word count. Mm-hmm. So you need to have 50 to 70,000 words.
It's 50,000 words to win NaNoWriMo.
Okay. So 50,000 words is the goal, or more, obviously. So to write 50,000 words in a month, you have to write so many in a day or in a given week, and you have to pace yourself. Well, you don't have to pace yourself, but you should if you intend to do it. So getting back to schedule, knowing your word count per day or how many potential you can write in a day is going to be part of your schedule.
And you have to know the other types of activities you do as well, because you can do time hacks ahead of time. So when you're in that month, you have less time, like, say, preparing for meals.
You've been able to hack time all along, and you've never told me this?
Yes, I time travel. It actually took me 74 years to write my novel.
Why didn't you? That's totally unfair that you did not share this with me before.
Well, this is the point I told you.
You know, I'm trying to learn guitar. I could go spend 74 years learning guitar and be, Eddie Vedder right now.
I couldn't tell
Eddie Van
you
Halen is
because
what
I told you now. And if I had told you before, it would have been a paradox. Haven't you watched Doctor Who?
Fair enough. Okay. So when do I get to time hack?
I haven't figured that one out yet.
Okay, getting back to meal prep.
Yeah. So meal preps. So like you and your spouse get together and figure out what you do. Like for us, we do eat at home a lot. But if I smoke meat, so if I can smoke extra meat. Oh, geez. You were so bad.
I tried. I couldn't not get through that without laughing. Jeff smokes meat. You heard him.
Yeah, that's right.
I get a second point.
Yes, because he doesn't understand the finer arts of barbecuing because he's a little baby.
Oh, you know what? You should have some of the meat that I cook.
But see, if you're not smoking it, it's not done right.
Fair enough.
You jerk.
So
Okay.
Meal prep, helping your spouse and figuring out ahead of time.
But like one of the things when you do something like that, we have backup meat in the freezer, pulled pork, smoked turkey, smoked ham, all kinds of stuff that doesn't need to be cooked day of, or there's other kinds of things that we can cook day of that are hands-off type of activities where you're not by the stove all the time.
Yeah, so basically like if Sarah and I are going to sit down and cook a meal for ourselves, that might take 40 minutes to cook the meal. Then you're going to sit down and eat it. Then you've got all these dishes that need to be cleaned. That's a lot of time that you could spend writing versus if you've already got that food like Jeff's frozen meat in the freezer. That takes a lot less time. It dirties fewer dishes because all you have to do is heat it up.
Yeah.
And then very few dishes to clean. All of that is time saved.
Mm-hmm. Or also try and stash money away from now until October so you have more time to do takeout or other types of ways so you spend less time in the meal activity. Because especially during the week, it'll be very hard because you're going to come home from work. You're probably going to eat sometime around that point. Then you're going to help clean up. If you have kids, you have to I don't know, put them in cages at night. I don't know.
Yeah, if you can crate train children, that's actually really helpful because then they won't pee or poop in the cage. So it's less to clean. So if you tie them up out back for a little while.
Put them in my coal mine. Okay.
So yes, take care of your children, please. Don't crate train your children.
You can't completely ignore your family ever. But what you can do is start brown nosing and making sure people know what your schedule is as far in advance as you can. And you have to respect your own time. So you can't play video games during your writing time, or else they're going to say, well, he told me this was when he was writing. He doesn't respect that time. I'm not going to respect that time either. I'll just disturb him no matter what he's doing in that time. So you have to respect your schedule. You have to let them know your schedule and do as much as you can ahead of time to help alleviate time pressures when you get into the month. Just
as NaNoWriMo treats the process of creating a novel in a month as a whole event, you have to make sure that the people in your life treat it as an event for you too.
Yeah.
Like it needs to be a known thing, not just a little thing you're doing at home. Like
when you're married, you have a significant other one, especially if you have kids, where I think that would make it even more complicated. It is a team victory.
Yeah. You're going to need help. You're not going to be able to do this alone unless you live alone, and then you are.
Then it's a lot simpler, I would imagine.
Well, but
in ways not.
But in ways not, because you don't have anyone to help you do all that stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
And also this is also a good point to mention that the NaNoWriMo community is gigantic and filled with cheerleaders. Everybody who wants to cheer you towards victory. So that everybody is very helpful in this community because you've got people who have tried to write a novel and haven't. You've got tons of people who have written novels and know how hard it was, and they want you to succeed. So if you want to take on NaNoWriMo this year, start getting involved in the communities now. Find a group, find a writing group.
And they'll have their own prep camps going on as well too. And now the next thing is mindset, and you can start fixing that now. A lot of writers I know get stuck in this idea of writing for the perfect sentence, the perfect paragraph, the perfect chapter, the perfect book. And I'm not saying whether or not it's a good goal, but you have to understand is there's a drafting process on purpose. And when you follow the 5 drafting process, and we'll talk more about this in detail in its own episode, the first draft is a rough draft, and it really means that.
It's messy. It doesn't have your best prose in it.
No.
You don't have all the ideas that you wanted to get down, but maybe they're kind of there.
They're kind of there because your outline has been transformed into words. That's what you're doing. You're taking your chapter outline and filling in the middle, which is actually a lot more work.
And the drafting process is one thing that I also want to make mention of. Somebody was talking about this the other day. It might even have been in the interview with John when I was re-listening to it. We're going to go with 5. We're going to say 5 drafts. Is that what we're going to call a complete novel? 5 drafts?
There are different, when we talk, we'll do an episode on different draft techniques.
Okay.
But there are actually like techniques that have been designed.
Of course. Well, then I'll say it this way.
I use the 5 draft
then
style.
I will say it this way. Understand that once you get to the second draft, you have begun the process of the drafting to completion, and there will be a point at which you have done your final draft, and that's it. You don't get to touch it again. It is now complete, even if you don't feel it is.
And I'll put it to you this way. The first 2 drafts for me are the only ones where I'm not using other people's input.
So you don't use other people's input for the first 2?
Well, the first one I'm doing off my cuff.
Okay,
The
I see
second
what
one,
you mean.
You're
going back
clean
again.
it up to try and get what I think makes sense in there. And then that's where you start using beta readers and editors at that point.
Fair enough.
So it doesn't suck.
Fair enough. Okay.
But work on the mindset now. If you are that perfectionist writer and I'm at a meetup and I hear you talking about, but what color of dress should she be wearing? Put a color down, first color that comes to your head. You can change that word later. It's a great thing. You can change words.
Yeah.
Until it's actually published.
Yeah. Basically what you're saying is, and you actually have this written on the board, is the concept of writing for bulk, not for quality.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't want you to have quality. Of course we do. But if you're going to try to get 50,000 words on a page or on your computer in 1 month, you have to go for quantity. So you have to just barf it all out. You got to get everything out. You got to get it all down.
I'll put to you this way. My second book I wrote was a NaNoWriMo. And it was a better first draft than my first novel was, which I did not do in NaNoWriMo, and I had no real schedule for. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming my third book will be better in the first draft than the second book. And I'm sure as I write more books, each of the first drafts will be better than the previous ones.
Yeah, well, of course, because
I have more experience, more practice, and that's how you get better. Don't overfocus. That's the reason why we'll do an episode on how to create drafts and a couple different techniques to do it. Pick one that works for you and then stick with it. By the time I'm done with 5, in theory, that should be published.
And you're including like the latter drafts, meaning other people have hit it and edited it and given you editing notes on it, right?
3, 4, 5 is, with an editor, and one of those will go out to beta readers as well too.
Okay.
Not the final copy edited one, but one before that. Usually draft 4. World building needs. And this is the last thing is and you'll have a better idea when you get a really strong outline put together. What are the things that you have not like when you do a framework like I do, the overall world building elements are really easy because I have them there, but I've not filled in all the details. So I have to maybe make a new town, obviously new characters, maybe develop some characters if they're being reused from previous stories. So at this point, you need to have all those done in 2. And really, all these things need to be done before you start writing. Because once you start writing, it's about punching the keyboard and putting words into a story. All right, now, with this week, Michael gets to do the world building task of the day, if he can read my handwriting.
Well, it just says figure out what you need. I'm assuming that is an inference to what you need to start the novel, or are we oh, no. I know what this is. The world building task is you need to know what you need physically.
Yeah.
So if your computer needs to get repaired, if your printer is broken, if your network is down, any sort of things that you need to actually commit yourself to writing the book, you need to start getting that stuff in order now. Yeah. If you need a new laptop and it's July now, so you still got 3 months to save some money and go buy a new laptop.
Because in October 25th, when you decide not to do it because your computer sucks, you won't start saving to put a computer together to do it next year. So try and remove your excuses. Those are the fears that will hold you back as you do this process. Those will be the biggest obstacles as an with anything in your life. So if you start addressing the problems that you have now, especially the longer term problems, the ones that aren't involved in the writing or world building process now, the easier it gets in October and November.
And I'm going to say beyond just the very basic stuff of, I need a keyboard to type on, you need to establish a space. Like at home where I usually do my computer work, I have a desk area set up, but it's in a very large room that is connected to my kitchen and my living room. Mm-hmm. It's not very conducive for the privacy that you might want for writing. So if that's the kind of environment you have, you may want to temporarily set up a little spot for yourself, move a chair or get yourself a small desk or a small table and stick it in a room where you have better privacy and let people know that when you're going in there to write, that you are to be left alone. So you need to prep what the environment is going to be for you to be successful.
And one of my favorites, and we'll maybe talk more about this in the future too, are playlists. And you have to be careful because I love a lot of music, and some music I love to sing along with, and none of that's in my writing/working space.
Yeah, it's not going to help you write.
Because you'll end up be like, yeah, rock and roll, baby. And I'm pretending like I'm singing. I should explain that to the audience.
I find that anything with lyrics will throw me off.
And some people are like that. I have certain songs which I don't have that issue with, but there's songs I do have that issue with. I like sort of more Beethoven-y kind of classical music. Works really well for me, or Wagner kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But in general, something that keeps my blood flowing, but does not make me sing along or do air guitar or drums. Mm-hmm. In the air, which I'm actually air doing all those right now. It's so wonderful.
It's pretty funny, actually. So what about the real world task?
Start sucking up now.
Yeah, you got to start filling up the karmic bank. That means your friends, your family, especially the people that you live with, you want to get them on the same page as being understanding when November comes.
Wow, that sounds much more classy than sucking up.
Look, if I don't bring the class level up on this show, who's gonna?
Raw?
It's not going to be you.
No. Like I said, raw.
That was a good point. I can't argue that one.
Oh, and Michael, what's the tease for this week?
You almost got me. Almost got me. No more teasing.
All right. But seriously, if you have friends who love the world building process, want to write or develop more stories, whether they're for games or for books, take a few moments. Let them know about our podcast. Just 2 people. Let them know about our podcast. If they don't even know how to do podcast, ask them to look at their phone, and you can show them how easy it is to get to podcasting. Because besides just wonderful stuff like the World Builders Anvil, there's a lot of great independent created content out there. And really, more people need to listen to more podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, of course, we would like more people listening to our show. That would be fantastic. Yeah. But even if you can open up your friend's world and expose them to stuff, if anyone has any hobby on the oddballs thing, I guarantee you there's multiple podcasts on it. Because
and there's some from sources that you're like, wow, they would do a podcast on that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, like it's just like I found out, like, the Nerdist, which obviously is one of the biggest podcasts there is, but I didn't know it. And then when I discovered and found out that it was Chris Hardwick, I never knew Chris Hardwick did stand-up comedy and all the writing that he does. Yeah. So listening to that show really opened me up to a lot of things. And plus, he has so many great guests on that show. So I love that show.
Yeah, it's a great show. But show them our show.
The World Builders Anvil.
And we thank you very much because you know what? We actually just passed 40,000 downloads.
And correct me if I'm wrong, how many countries are we being downloaded in?
I
Didn't you say it was like...
it's around 100, I believe.
We're up to 100, like around
100, yeah.
Wow, thanks, guys.
I don't know if the way they break it down, if it's strictly country to country. Mm-hmm. But there's at least countries, and then there's a few like unknown.
Well, the point is that we're over, it's fair to say, over 50 countries were downloaded in.
Well over 50 countries.
That amazes me. Yeah. So I encourage you guys to reach out and contact us if there are topics or questions. Like, we'd love to interact with you guys.
Yeah, we love you guys, and we want to thank you because you know what? If you would have told me 2 years ago, not even 2 years into doing this show, there would be 40,000 downloads on this strange weirdo who likes to talk about questions all the time and usually doesn't like to be too judgy unless it's to his friends.
Well, and honestly, the listenership really jumped up once I joined the show, so.
Well, yeah.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah. See you next time. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under Podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us in this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Garduel.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.